Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Francesca Arnoldy. Francesca is a doula and the original developer of the End of Life Doula training programs at the University of Vermont. Today we're talking about her new book, The Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to this channel down below. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you happen to listen to the podcast. If you're inclined to help out with just a small financial contribution, you can go to eoluniversity.com/support. And there you'll find 3 different ways you can help keep this YouTube channel and the podcast on the air. So thanks in advance if you choose to do that. And now we'll move on with my conversation with Francesca Arnoldy. Today, I'm so happy to welcome back my return guest, Francesca Lynn Arnoldy. Francesca is a doula and researcher with the Vermont Conversation Lab. She was the original developer of the end-of-life doula training programs at the University of Vermont, and she is the author of 3 death-lit books, Cultivating the Doula Heart, Essentials of Compassionate Care, a guidebook, Map of Memory Lane, a picture book, and the forthcoming workbook, The Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. And you can find out more about Francesca's work and her books at either of these 2 websites, francescalynnarnoldy.com or contemplativedoula.com. So Francesca, welcome back. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you for having me again, Karen.
Yeah, we met each other. It seems like such a long time ago now, I guess because it was pre-COVID and we were in Vermont at a conference there and had dinner together, and it was so wonderful to meet you. And I think at that time you had written Cultivating the Doula Heart.
I think
And
you're right. I think it was pretty recently published, and I'm actually gearing up to present at that conference again just in a couple of weeks.
oh, how nice. Oh,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. And then you came on the podcast again after writing the Map of Memory Lane, which I just wanted to give a shout out to that book because it's such a wonderful book for children and such a gentle introduction to grief. And I feel like it's something every family should have on the shelf, as a way of talking about our grief, because these circumstances arise. Pets die, neighbors die. It's a common experience, and it's a beautiful book for talking to children about grief. So
Thank you. Thank you for that endorsement from you in your position in the end of life care realm and as a grandmother. I appreciate it.
that's so true. I have the book, which I mean, 9 months is a little too young to share it, but I will be sharing that with my grandchildren, hopefully plural grandchildren in the future.
Wonderful. And I've known some grandparents who have printed off the companion activity book, My Map of Memory Lane, which you can get online on my site. And you can print off as many pages as you'd like, and then you can put pictures, you can draw pictures, you can capture memories and writing, special times that you share, and then continue to add to it. It's a beautiful keepsake.
Oh, I love that. So, yeah, I love that idea of creating the keepsake in advance, knowing that most likely one day my grandchildren will be experiencing my death and will need to deal with that grief. But having already created the map of memory lane for them, how amazing and wonderful is that for them to have that to keep and hold.
Yeah, I've heard from a couple families who have found it useful. There was a friend of mine who she just posted it. It's been a year since her beloved died, and they have young children. And so she introduced the picture book to them, and they were creating together with their father during his last weeks their map of memory lane and capturing those memories and moments together and the stories. And on his final night, the mom, my friend, let her kids know, gave her children the opportunity to go say goodbye. Her daughter, their youngest, went to say goodbye, and then she stopped by her mom and she said, "Mom, I'm going to be okay." And she said, "You are?" And she said, "Yes, I'm going to go to memory lane." And so, of
Wow.
course, that's not going to rescue her from deep heartache and grief. That's going to be part of her journey. But she had a coping technique prepared. She had the language there. She had something she could lean on, which just meant the world for me to hear.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I really feel like it's a brilliant book. The illustrations are gorgeous in your book as well. So it's something so pleasing to read together and look at and very soothing.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I completely agree. I picked this illustrator out of many because I found her work, especially her nature scenes, to just be so captivating and beautiful and
Mm.
comforting.
Yeah, definitely. So that book is The Map of Memory Lane is available on your website. Is it also on Amazon for people who
Yeah,
wanted to
it's
go there?
it's pretty much everywhere you can find books, and local bookstores can order it as well.
Okay. Well, we actually scheduled this to talk about your new book, but I just wanted to give that shout out to Map of Memory Lane because I'm sure there are people out there searching for things like this, and it's perfect. And I have it in advance before I need it, so I think that's a great plan as well to have it on the shelf. So I wanted to ask you about your newest book, The Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared, and what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so very relatedly, my main inspiration for this book is my death journal, which is a keepsake gift that I have been compiling for my loved ones for my end of life for many years now. And it started, I'm not sure what originally inspired me to begin this project. I think it was because I felt compelled to write down some heartfelt messages to them. And so I started there, and it's a scrapbook. And then I just decided to go in any direction that my creativity led me. So I have included mementos, there's photographs in there, postcards from trips that we've taken. I had this one time I went to help a friend postpartum after she had had her second baby. She flew me to Europe, so it was my longest time that I had spent away from my own kids. And so while I was away, I had written down special memories on these little cards. And so every night the kids would read one of these memories and before bed. And there was a piece of me that felt like if for whatever reason I don't come back from this trip, they have this at least. They have something, some sort of memory of me. And so I glued in those little pieces of paper within it. It has poetry, it has song lyrics, it has quotes that I find really inspirational, my hopes for them during their time of grief and beyond. It has some of my wishes and some of the planning that I've done around end of life care and my post passage wishes as well, and contingency plans on top of that. So I continue to add to it. And I also include lists in there. So I made sure to add these into the new book as well. So the first list that I wrote was comfort is. And I just started brainstorming all of the ways that I have found comfort in life. So it is a walk down memory lane, but it's also an array of tools that my loved ones could use for my time of dying if they're able to provide care, if it's not something that's unexpected or sudden. If it is unexpected and sudden, then it's a walk down memory lane and it's treasured memories. So then from there, I went on to happiness is and a list. I have a list of gratitude in there. I have an activity that I did with my kids, which is about beliefs. I believe that, I believe in. And so my children and I each filled out a card, like a note card, and I have those glued in there as well. I have acrostic poems about life and what it means to me. And I continue to just think of more things to add. So that's the main inspiration for the new book is I included all the goodies and ideas from my own death journal for other people to then explore and modify and customize. And also my working through wishes workshop, which takes people through, I call it contemplative planning for the end of life. So in addition to legal and medical forms that people might complete, this is closer to what I offer in terms of birth support for people who are pregnant, which I've done that work as well, and their wishes and hopes and planning for the end of life. Who, the what, not the when, but the how, the why, the where, all of those features of atmosphere and how it might feel, how we can fully honor someone during their end of life, and how we can get creative when we have to kind of shift plans and things go sideways, so that it will still feel like a comforting, safe experience. So I blended those things together and then added in even more than that in the book.
Mm, it's really wonderful, and so really the Death Doula's Guide, it's a workbook that people can work on so they can write things in it, and I guess just as you described, they could even put pictures in it and draw things or write poetry. It could actually become a collection that's similar to your death journal, but you've made it really easy for someone to put that together.
Yeah, I mean, I invite people to consider it their first draft or their final draft. So for some people, they'll fill out, there is plenty of room for writing and lots of prompts throughout. So they might fill it out and that's it. That's the end all be all. And then for other people, they might look at it as a first draft and then keep a separate sort of journal that's the final version of it. So I do encourage people to not get too locked into perfectionism, because sometimes we feel like this is so meaningful that we want to get it just right, and that keeps us from writing down anything at all. So I
Mhm.
try to remind people that no, they want to see you on the page. They want to hear your voice, your messages, not the most polished version of you, but the real you.
Mm, that's so wonderful, and I'm enthralled with the idea of the death journal that you described because I'm someone who journals and I love writing, and I spontaneously write poems in my journals and draw little pictures, but what do I have from all these years of my life? I have maybe 50 notebooks piled up somewhere, and I always think, "Oh, if only my family would be able to see this page after I'm gone because it's such a special message," but I realized they're never going to sit down and read through all of these journals. So you've just inspired me with this idea. I could go back through and rip out some of those pages and include them in a very special death journal that I leave behind for them. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, and personal touches are everything. So this book provides sort of a starting off point, and then from there, it's like go wherever you feel called, and however this could reflect you and the relationships that you share. I also made sure to be mindful of people who might not know if they have someone who would want to receive a death journal. So it's also really valuable to do this work as an introspective exercise and getting to know yourself well, reflecting back on your life, what has happened to you, processing that, continuing to heal from things, clarifying your inner self and your wishes moving forward.
And that's something I wanted to say I really appreciate about your work in the Doula Heart book as well, that you emphasize the importance of the inner life. And when we're working with death and dying, being able to be that it's as much about us just being who we are in addition to the things we do. And sometimes we overemphasize what we do and forget about being, but you offer such great tools to help people be more present and to help people actually do their own inner work. And I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks for saying so. I couldn't agree more. And I feel like for me, it's a continual practice. I will never fully accomplish realizing who I am and honing my approaches as a doula. I'm always learning every time I'm supporting somebody, every time I'm reflecting on my own losses and grieving my own deaths that I've experienced in my own life. It will be a work. I will be a work in progress forevermore.
Yeah, and that's really the perfect attitude to have as we work with death and dying because we're acquiring knowledge all the time from things we read and learn, but it's our inner wisdom that we grow that can help us be more impactful in many ways with people that we work with and for our own lives and for our own family members as well.
Mhm.
And I know you started the book with a heart centering practice, which I really like. It's very simple, but it's such a good reminder to get heart centered before we start working on something like this kind of material. But even before we go visit a dying patient or talk to someone who's grieving. So maybe you could just describe the heart centering practice a little bit.
Sure. I think it's so important that we shift in with some intention, like you said, whether we're going for a visit, we're doing our work, or we're reaching into our introspection. as well. So reaching into our own inner knowledge and tapping into that. So for any of this work, I feel like it's so important for me, especially, and I encourage everyone to explore this, to pause and to not just bring in your normal day-to-day energy, to not bring in your worries, your concerns, your to-do list, anything that's weighing on your mind, and really fully allow yourself the opportunity to tune into the work that you're going to take on. So this heart centering exercise was inspired by a practice I learned in a healing touch workshop, which is similar to Reiki in some regards. And I think it's so important that you use your breath, which I think for people with certain health issues and conditions, it might not be appropriate to lean on the breath, but just as a way to visualize some rhythm. So you are visualizing a certain word that reflects wellness to you. Whatever word pops into your mind is the right word for you. And then you work with that with your breath to sort of really fill up your heart space. And then thinking about beyond that, filling up your whole self around yourself. And then from there, you can even extend it outward to other people. But it's a chance to kind of pause and release anything that you maybe even unknowingly are carrying into that session, and then be able to fully open your mind and heart for what is to come. And I give some alternatives as well to it in case there are other creative ways that people want to work with this word. And just as a doula, I think it's so important to offer an array of options for everything in the book, including this.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a powerful but simple tool that I think it's a great idea for everyone to learn a tool, have a tool like this kind of in your toolkit, that wherever you are, you can rely on this simple little practice to help you get more heart-centered and more into the moment. And it can help you get through a stressful situation or a time when you don't feel prepared, but help you go within and calm yourself, and then become more present to whatever's happening around you.
Yes, absolutely. So this is one that I offer, and then I encourage people to try it out, see what works well, modify it if you need to, and then capture it, sort of document it, lock it in for yourself, and then lean on this every time you're coming to do some death journaling, a session.
Yeah, that's such a great idea. And you mentioned the word wellness, and that's something that you've written about, the concept of death wellness. So, tell us more about what that means to you, and your ideas about it.
Yeah, so it's kind of a take on death positivity, which I completely appreciate. I think that that movement has done so much to help us remember what it is to be mortal, and also to be able to have more conversations about it in our culture, and to be more accepting of the inevitability of our mortality. And yet, I know that there are some people who, when they hear the word positive, they think, and they're wrongly assuming based on the philosophies of death positivity, but it's pretty natural to think like positive. Does that mean I have to be happy about it? Does that
Mhm.
mean I have to be excited about it? Absolutely not. It can be, I mean, death provides us with an array of experiences and emotions and reactions to it, and they're all completely understandable, and there's room for it all. So I think for me, wellness kind of creates a little more space for, you don't have to be happy about your mortality. Nobody needs to be completely 100% okay with a terminal diagnosis. That's not the end goal. The end goal is really working with whatever is surfacing. That's how we find our way to wellness and to healing. And so often people, when it comes to grief or when it comes to mortality awareness practices, we're kind of taking one step closer and then a couple steps back, and that's very natural to have that kind of pacing where we're not going to go full-fledged 100% just toward it and into it, because psychologically that's too intense most of the time, that's too overwhelming. So as a protective measure, we're going to take a couple steps back, we're going to take a breather, we're going to take a break, we're going to reset, we're going to find a little more energy and courage, and then step back toward it again. And so I want to acknowledge that finding your own rhythm and pace within this work is really important for self-care and wellness.
Mm. That's such a good point. And I really like this concept of wellness being, death being part of wellness. I mean, that they belong together. And I was thinking of how it could be helpful for healthcare practitioners out there who are reluctant to talk about death because they even say to me, well, my focus is on wellness. I'm helping people get well. I don't need to talk to them about death. That's not what I do. And they're separating the two as if death doesn't belong anywhere in the wellness conversation. So I love this. I like using that term to remind people that everyone will die. Therefore, death is certainly it's a part of life and a part of being well and whole, and even a part of being healed. We will still die even if we're healed. So I really like the term, and I'm glad that you brought those together.
Yeah, I love that willingness to embrace wellness as part of end of life and part of end of life care. It's
Yeah.
completely possible.
Yeah, and that if we could get healthcare providers to recognize that it isn't a completely separate realm that someone else should deal with and talk about, it's part of the work that they do. And that brings me to something else that you put in the book that you compose is a letter to care providers. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and why you included that and what you put into that letter.
Sure. Yeah, mostly throughout the book, I'm talking to one particular reader. I'm talking to you, the reader, an individual who is a mortal being. And I've dumped all of my best tools, my doula bag straight into the book. And I wanted to also make sure to point out that if a person is a reader who is providing care, so either a professional care provider, a hospice volunteer, or a friend or family member who's providing care for a loved one, and you're using this book, there are so many practical tools, so many prompts that you could introduce into that work while you're supporting somebody. But I think as step one, we have to be able to do this work ourselves. We have to try out these exercises. And at the same time, we have to recognize that if we are not also experiencing a terminal condition, then our work is largely theoretical. It's pretty abstract. I mean, it's still really valuable work to contemplate our own end of life, but it's different for someone who's really facing the end and for whom it's much more pressing and much more real. So being able to just clearly distinguish that and also think about some approaches like what if somebody's resistant to this, but you think it might be really beneficial to them? How do you kind of work with that? Or what if you have advice that you think would be really super helpful in this certain situation? How can you convey that without pressuring somebody or forcing it onto somebody? So I kind of take people through some tips for being able to offer this kind of support for others.
Yeah, and I like your emphasis that we honestly, as much work as we each do on our own end of life plans, we still have no idea how it's actually going to be for us. And maybe everything we think we would choose, maybe that will all change for us. We just don't know. And it's why we have to be really open to whatever. And we have to allow other people to have their own process, no matter what seems to us like the best way to do things. That may not be the truth for that particular person.
Yeah, and that's pure compassion.
Yeah, just being able to let go of whatever our own agendas and biases are. It's fine that we have them for ourselves, but we have to be willing to be in the space with that person and in a way curious and letting them tell us who they are and how they see the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have to get really clear on what is ours, what is our stuff, our expectations, our hopes for ourselves, our own worries. So that's why we need to do the work so that we can then distinguish, okay, this is theirs, this is not mine. And we can make space for their own wisdom to come through and for them to tap into their own inner voice and then to also be able to offer ideas and resources, but in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're going to disappoint us if they make a different decision for themselves.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned the word compassion, and that's something I really appreciated in I think our first conversation when we talked about cultivating the doula heart is the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. So I think it would be great to review those for the audience.
Sure. Yeah, this is a theme that I've woven through all of my work. And it was actually Dr. Gramling, who I work with as part of the Vermont Conversation Lab. And he's been supportive of my doula work. And he wrote the foreword in the first book. And he had shared with me years ago some research, and I can't cite the research offhand, but research about empathy versus compassion. And I found it really fascinating. So, what he told me was there were two groups of interventionists. Then one group had been trained in empathy. So, they were taught to, during a session with another person, to try to feel what that other person was feeling and really experience what it was that they were trying to convey. And the person sharing the story was telling about something that was really hard, really difficult, really laden with emotion, heavy. So the other group was trained in compassion, and their training taught them to witness and to open space to listen, to remain very kind of steady, calm, centered, neutral in their own stance. They were not instructed to give advice. They weren't to fix. They weren't to rescue. They were there to be there and to purely listen to the person's story. And what they found as they were looking at the brains of the people in the two groups, that often the people in the empathy group, the place that was firing was the place associated with dread. So when they were
Mm.
going into these sessions, they were feeling dread. They were really nervous. They were really worried in anticipation of having to like feel these super heavy feelings alongside the person that was going to be sharing. And the people who were in the compassion group, it was more firing in the pleasure centers. And not that they were taking pleasure in another person's pain, but that they felt this deep honor to be told these stories that were so important, that were so profound, that it felt like a privilege to be in that space with that person, but they weren't responsible for the story and for the emotions. And so for me, that really gave me the opportunity and an invitation to think deeply about, okay, how could I put that theory into practice for myself as a doula? So I like to think of sympathy and empathy as stepping stones toward compassion. And sympathy, it's really important that we know what that is. And to me, I define it as, I feel sorry for you, or I feel bad for you. And that is an important experience to kind of start with, that when other people are in pain, that you can feel so sad for them, so sorry for them. And then empathy takes it a step further, where you kind of take one step back and you're thinking, well, if I were in that situation, how would I feel? Or a situation in my past that's similar to that, how did I feel? So you are trying to match the emotions of the other person, but it's not necessarily straight to pity. So it's like, I feel sorry for you, and then it's, I feel how you feel. But we know that that's not really possible, because emotions are unique, they're personal, they're always in flux, they're changing. And so for me, the shift to compassion, one way that's helpful to think about it is the golden rule to the platinum rule. So thinking about do unto others as you would have done unto you would be the golden rule, but then the platinum rule shifts the lens. So do unto others as they would have done unto them. So it's
Mm.
not about me and thinking what I would want done to me. It's learning what the other person wants done for them. So compassion then is, I honor how this feels for you. It's not, I'm sorry, or I pity you, or I'm trying to feel how you're feeling. It's purely, I honor what this is for you. I honor your experience, and I know it's not mine. And so as humans, as mortals, we know suffering, we know loss. We've all experienced in our path a variety of those things, but we don't know how this other person is reacting or responding to it. We can't know that inside of ourselves. We can listen to it though. We can learn from them. We can give them the opportunity to share what that is with us, but it's not ours, it's theirs. And so part of that shift for me means holding a lot of trust. And it's trust in the other person's ability to navigate their own journey, and trusting in their inherent wisdom that maybe can feel quite blocked or quite silent for them during times of overwhelm, but we know it's there, and we can kind of create the best conditions that they might be able to tap into that and hear it and trust it for themselves.
Mm. Wow, that's so beautiful, and it's really profound to me, and I was thinking about the fact that these days we hear a lot of the term compassion fatigue for healthcare providers, that they're suffering from compassion fatigue, but it really sounds to me they're actually suffering from not being able to be in a state of compassion, from maybe empathy fatigue is what it really is, that they're in the state of trying to fix people, which is impossible and they can't really do. And if they could enter into a true state of compassion, they would probably not burn out as quickly.
I completely agree. I think it's empathy fatigue from trying to take on their emotions. And I think it's also a lack of self nurturance, a lack of giving themselves the time and space to process what they're experiencing. And so it accumulates and then it becomes potentially fatigue, burnout, anxiety. It could become substance dependence, wanting to numb out and getting just totally overwhelmed, or anger outbursts in their life. I mean, it can look like so many things if we're not tending to ourselves along the way.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot lately about self-compassion and learning how to start with ourselves and have compassion for ourselves on this journey wherever we are, and whatever today is like for me and whatever I'm experiencing, having compassion around that and not having expectations that are too high or too great, that can never take place, and not putting myself in situations where I can burn out so easily.
Yeah, not feeling so disappointed in ourselves when we're not at our best. When we're not at our best and we're starting to notice that, that's actually a cue. That's a really important cue and a really important invitation. Like, okay, I've got to pump the brakes here. I've got to take a minute to work on myself because this is just going to snowball and I'm going to lose all my energy or all my passion for my work. And, that a lot of people are experiencing that right now, especially post post pandemic. I mean, post the middle of the worst part of the pandemic. We're still definitely dealing with COVID, but a lot of people in the aftermath are really struggling to rekindle their passion and to heal and to kind of take the time to be able to do that and find the energy that it takes to do that, especially when you continue to put it off. And I'm not blaming, I'm not passing judgment. I know people have taken on so much during these past 4 years, but we really need to do that in order to stay well ourselves so that we can continue to extend care to others.
Yeah, that's so very true. And those of us who have the doula heart that you write about, who maybe feel called to this work, part of it is because we have big hearts. It comes naturally to us to want to take care of other people, but we may not have grown up with the knowledge that we need to care for ourselves and that we matter as well. And we might even have a great capacity for caring for others to a huge extent because it just comes naturally, but we do have to give ourselves permission to pay attention to me and what is it that I need in the moment also.
Yeah, and it's not weakness. Sometimes we think it's weakness if, oh, my capacity right now is actually limited, but this is what I pride myself in. I'm a natural nurturer. I want to care for the world. Well, yes, but if you truly value what you're offering to others, then you will also accept it for yourself because it is so important for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the chapters or the sections in your book is on doing a life review. And so I was curious for any tips that you have about how or why to do a life review, like if we were going to create our end of life plan. Because I'm familiar with doing life reviews with patients at the very end, just before they die, and that's something people do naturally. But it makes sense to include a life review. And as it sounds like you're doing in your death journal, in a way, like that becomes like an ongoing life review. So I just wanted to talk about that more.
Yeah, to chronicle our life. It's fascinating. And how quickly do we lose sight of certain things we've experienced? And then if you document them, how wonderful it is to look back on those pages and be like, oh my gosh, that's right. That happened, or we went there. And it's beautiful to reminisce. I think for people in the book, I walk them through a process of releasing first as sort of a preface before a life review, because sometimes what I find is for people who have experienced trauma and difficulty, that they haven't really looked at, it can feel pretty overwhelming in the moment when those moments come back. So I think if as a first step, I invite people to think about doing some expressive writing and some journaling, and I guide people through that process and then releasing that writing through ritual. So that's part of your healing process, that you've been able to kind of surface it to the degree that feels comfortable and safe, and really think about, who you are as a person as a result of that. So not only the potential like pain that you had suffered, but also maybe the coping strategies that you had developed or relationships that kind of came out of that. Was there any beauty that came out of that in the aftermath? Not that you deserved it or that you would want to do that again for yourself, but that there are sometimes some gems there to claim as your own, for your own strength and your love and who you've become as a result. So there's a whole process of that. And then for life review, it kind of depends on the goal. So for some people, they really want to take an honest look back and talk about it all and kind of cover it all. And then for other people, they want to maybe kind of start there, but then think about, how do I capture that in gift form, where I might not want to include all the bits and pieces of my life. I might want to put on a little bit of filter when I think about who is receiving my life review. And it's more of a gift, and I'm able to offer some words of wisdom, some advice, and a glimpse into what I have experienced, what I have endured, and some of my celebrations and successes. So it does kind of depend on the end goal of it. But I think in any way, it can be really cathartic and really illuminating for people. And so with the life review, I talk about some different approaches to that. Even like you could go and try to do decades. You could look back, because it's a lot to think about. Okay, my whole life, how do I organize that? So for some people, they look at the decades and they look at the highlights, and I take people through those questions again. Who was important, what was happening, where was I, how did I feel about things, and why, and those types of questions along the way. Or you can think about eras. So you might be able to break your life down into my childhood, my teen years, my early adulthood, my middle adulthood, my later years, or it could even be more specific than that, like my family life, my marriage, my professional life. So there are different ways that we can organize our thoughts around that depending on what we want it to turn out as.
Mm. And I can see the power of it to be so healing. And I remember a patient, she was in her 30s and had two young children and was dying of colon cancer. She did essentially a life review by creating a scrapbook of her life. And maybe that's sort of like the map of memory lane or your death journal, but she created it for her kids. And it was amazing to see the transformation in her, because she was a person that had a lot of self-blame and felt like she was a failure all of her life, and she never accomplished anything. Her life wasn't worth anything. But after she created this scrapbook, it was amazing how many gems, as you described, that she discovered within her own life. Like, oh my goodness, like I didn't remember I did this. And then I learned that. And then I talked to this person, all these things started coming together in this pattern of her life. She was able to see the beauty in all of it, and it was so powerful. But I think all of us could use that. We don't have to necessarily have a terminal diagnosis. We could all use that wherever we are in our lives right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it brings up a memory of me. I was working with a young person, a friend of mine. Her husband was dying of cancer. They have two young kids. This is a different friend. And this was a person who was local. So I was able to go visit and provide some respite for my friend. And about a year prior, I had encouraged them gently to try to think about capturing some of their messages in video, because he had brain cancer. And so I knew that more than likely his ability to speak was going to be impacted at some point. And they did that. They created a whole video library, which is beautiful. So when I would come visit, I was continuing to help with these remembrance gifts for his children, because one of his deepest worries was that his children, especially their youngest, they weren't going to remember him, and they weren't going to know him. And he really wanted for them to know him. So I helped with some letters to each of the kids, and he would just speak aloud and I would type. And then when things continued to decline, with his condition, he could no longer do that. So we kind of shifted into his favorites because that was easier for him to give me one word answers. So I kind of went through all the categories that I could think of for what his favorite everything, sport, book, movie, food, place, memory, trip, so many things. And he was able to usually give me a one word answer. And in that way, his kids could continue to get to know him and know him better as they were growing older. And I write in the book about this a little bit. And I imagine as they reach a certain age where they could watch their dad's favorite movie, that would still be another time, maybe even a decade later, where they feel like they still have that connection to him and they have a better understanding of him in those moments. And that's what I think a death journal can provide and offer.
What a beautiful legacy to leave. And and especially when we know we're leaving behind children or grandchildren even who will want to remember us in the future, but may need assistance, and creating this for them it's the perfect tool.
I think another benefit that I have discovered, or I feel in my own self, is that I anticipate when it's my time to die, not knowing if it will be unexpected or not knowing if I will have time to sort of wrap my head around it. That knowing I have created this death journal for my loved ones, I think will make it easier for me to surrender into the mystery of my death. So it's sort of a selfish purpose as well, because I think that my intense love for them and my worries for them, that I won't be able to physically comfort them when they're deep in grief, that I have this. They at least have my writing. They can access my voice, my essence, my words of encouragement when they're at their lowest low. And they'll still be able to have a version of me available to them. And I think that, because that's going to be my strongest anchor, I have no doubt, to this body, this lifetime, that will help me release into my time of dying. I hope, I think.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so makes sense to me as a mother and now a grandmother too. Excuse me. I relate to that.
Mhm.
Excuse me. I relate to that need to make sure that my offspring will be okay in their grief when I won't be here physically to comfort them.
Mhm. And it's not like I'm putting things in my death journal that I haven't said aloud already or that are secret. I would never withhold any of this and sort of save it for that time. So I think it's important for people to kind of do both, like say what's on your heart, say what's on your mind, express your love, work through forgiveness and unburdening yourself, do all of that, and consider capturing it in a tangible form that other people will be able to access and enjoy.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea. Work through it first because then you may want to compress it or distill it down to the essence of the message that you want to leave.
Mhm.
Well, I wanted to say this to you, Francesca, that ever since the first moment I met you, I've been so amazed and impressed by how much wisdom you have, life wisdom, but this wisdom that incorporates death and dying. And how did you become so wise? I'm just really curious, and maybe you can't answer that. I don't know, but it just seems like this wisdom flows through you naturally, and it's very impressive.
That seems, it's very kind and generous of you to say that. I think I'm just a really naturally curious person. So I'm constantly wanting to learn from my own experiences and the experiences of others around me. I think my introduction into birth work really opened my eyes to, life isn't just about the mundane kind of get through your day, one foot in front of the other. We can kind of look like zombies sometimes. Like that's not what life really is. And I think being part of these more peak experiences alongside people like birth and like the end of life and like grief as well has really allowed me to kind of recalibrate in my day to day and reprioritize and remember what life is really about, the kind of deeper meaning and deeper presence, but also deeper rest too. Like I'm not always trying to be in motion or always trying to be busy, but that allows me to kind of access what feels just more profound than the normal kind of daily grind. I also just I had some earlier experiences that I think helped lead me in this direction. I didn't know it at the time, but I was recently just reflecting on the death of my aunt, and she died. She was only 49, and she was like a second mom to me growing up. We were very, very close through my childhood, teen years, and early adulthood. And I was 23, 24, and she got pancreatic cancer. And so I was, at the time when she was diagnosed, I was able to spend time with her, kind of walk through some of her treatments with her, keep her company. I was knitting her or crocheting her hats to keep her head warm when she lost her hair, and just sort of seeing what that process was like for her. And then at the very end, I came to be with her at the hospital. My cousin called to let me know that things, time was short. And I talk about this in the book as well. This was really like my first lesson in death. I stopped and I wrote her a little note, and I'm looking at the note and the bear as we're talking. And I rolled up the note and I tucked it in this little bear's arms that she had given me with a daisy. It's my favorite flower, and she would always get me daisy themed things. And I brought that with me, and I showed up to the hospital room just having no idea what to expect. It was teeming with people. She was so well loved. But nobody knew what to do. It was really awkward. And it was like, do you talk? Do you not? Like, how do you show your respect and reverence? Death literacy was not present in that room. Like, we didn't know what to do with ourselves. And then later on that evening, there were only a handful of us left, and I ended up just listening to my heart, and I asked if I could have a little bit of time with her. And my uncle and my cousins said that I could. So at that point, her eyes were closed and she was in her deep final sleep. And I crawled up into her bed and I cuddled up next to her, and I unfurled the note and I read it aloud to her. And it's really an expression of just everything that she had meant to me and how much I loved her, and just thanking her for everything she had done. And she, didn't have the energy to open her eyes, but she whispered, "I love you." And that was my goodbye. And that moment of connection that we shared really helped to carry me through. I mean, she died in a matter of hours after that. And that really helped to carry me through my time of grief. She also, unbeknownst to me, had asked my cousin to prepare a final birthday present for me. So she died in May, my birthday is in July. And so that July, my cousin surprised me with this last birthday gift from my aunt. And it was daisies again, of course. And she had a series of frames in this daisy fabric, and a message and a birthday card for me. And it was like, that enduring bond and that last symbol of love. I can't tell you how much it meant. So I do think that along the way, I've had these moments that have really kind of shifted who I am and who I've become.
Yeah, and maybe what a gift from your aunt. She gave you this inkling of a map of memory lane by leaving a gift for you, but also the idea of the death journal and all of this work that you've done. That's really a beautiful story, and that kind of brings everything full circle in a way. And I'm so glad that you shared that with us.
Yeah, and then I named my firstborn after her, so he has her maiden name in her honor. And I feel like in some ways my kids still know her. They know what she was like. They have a good sense of her. And I'm looking at her picture in my casket. My That is a bookshelf for now until it's called to its final use, and she's right up there on the top shelf.
Mm. That's so lovely. Thank you for sharing that, because I do understand some of the sources of the wisdom that you've acquired in your life that you share so beautifully. And that's what I wanted to say about the book. So I'll mention the name again. The Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared, is that it's really filled with wisdom and with practices that are actually going to make a big difference to people. And so to help people go deeper and to actually do the work that's so important before they reach the end of life and as they're taking care of other people who are dying.
Yeah, and then I hope that they enjoy a sense of relief and sort of liberation too once they have accomplished these, because I know I definitely do, and the people that I've supported seem to as well.
And so the book is going to be published July 1st, and we're airing this a few days before. So, but people can still pre order the book in advance. And maybe you could talk about that. If people pre order the book, that they'll get some bonuses.
Yes, I'm super excited about the pre-order campaign. So the book is available. Any book, any local bookstore should be able to pre-order it for you and have it ready for you on publication day or send it to you, or anywhere online. You can find it. You can go to my website and find a link tree that includes lots of different sources for buying the book. And then after you pre-order the book, come back to my website and you click on that book link. There's a page for it, and you can learn how to submit your name and information to be able to receive the thank you bundle. And so, as part of this thank you bundle, we have a beautiful offering by you, Dr. Wyatt, which I love to be able to share with people. It's really gorgeous, beautifully designed, very inspirational, alongside 9 other items that have been carefully crafted and gifted to this campaign from other voices in the field that I really respect and admire.
So it's really an amazing offer to be able to get this bundle along with the Death Doula's Guide. So I highly recommend to people, if you think you might want the Death Doula's Guide, that you pre-order it in advance before publication date on July 1st, because that will allow you to get the bundle as well, which will be useful, I'm sure, for everyone. It'll take you probably all year to to read through everything that's
Yeah, there's a
there, but
lot in there. Yeah.
yeah, but there'll be wonderful resources to have.
Yeah, and I love collaborating with people in the field and lifting up other people's voices. I feel like we share such a beautiful common goal, and together we're increasing these conversations and bolstering people's confidence.
And I love that, and I love the idea that we really do all need to be collaborating and working together, and with death literacy as part of our goal. If there's I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about death literacy, so I didn't ask you about that already, but
Yeah, I mean, remembering what it is to be mortal, helping people have more of a frame of reference about end of life, what to expect and language to use, what's common, what are signs of needing to ask for more help, and really normalizing, I think is so important, because that tends to allay fear that people have for showing up and stepping up into these times of intensity. So I think promoting death literacy is incredibly important for all of us.
yeah, and thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your book and all of your work. And I'm sure we'll talk again, because we've had such great conversations every time we get have a chance to meet each other. And I'm really excited about your book. I'll remind people again to go to francescalynnarnoldy.com or contemplativedoula.com. And I'll leave links in the show notes for this episode too, where you can go to those sites and get the Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. So, Francesca, thank you so much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Francesca. I always love talking with her. We can have deep and spiritual, meaningful conversations together, and that's really important to me. So, if you enjoy this content, be sure and share it with other people and let them know how to subscribe. And also make sure you've subscribed to this channel and the podcast as well. I'll be back next week with more content for you. Until then, remember, we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings you next, and love each and every moment of this very precious existence. Bye bye.